C.S. Lewis said, "We read to know we are not alone." I agree. I've been a reader all my life, and yet I still felt alone. And as I reach my 75th year on the planet this August, I started to look at my reading journey, which is almost the whole 75 years. And my topic today is, can reading too much limit your life? Can it have an adverse effect on your life? And I know this is a controversial subject. I love reading. Reading has saved my life, and I wouldn't be the same person if I didn't read all my life. But yet, I do notice that there have been some limits to my life, my long life so far, because of my excessive reading, what I consider excessive reading. So I got this idea for this topic not only by looking over my reading life over these 75 years, but by a video that Jack from Spread Book Joy did, and I'm going to have it down in the description box, and it's "Can We Read Too Much?" And she had a different take on it, and also, as she said, we only have a limited time on the planet, and we have other things that we want to accomplish. And does reading excessively take that away? But I'm coming at it from a different perspective, more of a personal journey over my years of reading. Now, when I was a child, I was an anxious kid, and I lived in a chaotic household. Mostly it was noisy and even sometimes emotionally abusive. There was a lot of shouting. So I escaped into my books to silence that noise. But sometimes especially when I was alone in the house, on those rare occasions, and I was sitting at the kitchen table reading a book, I started feeling really lonely and even depressed. And I had that feeling at various times of my life, which made me think, am I reading too much? So I think this is where I started to do a deep dive and see if there is such a thing as reading too much. People say we should put down our phones and pick up a book. Well, in the 50s, we didn't have phones to pick up. I didn't even have a phone in the house. And it was a different time, and I always had my nose in a book, but we were commanded by our parents to get out of the house, go outside and play with our friends. So I think that in a way that saved me from maybe being more of a bookworm than I would have been. But still, I feel that sometimes the reading made me lonely because of the solitude, and I wasn't used to it living in the family that I lived in. And I think I spoke before that I had a mentally ill mother who escaped into books. That was her only escape. And I'm very grateful that she taught me to read, because reading has so many positive benefits. And I'm just going to tell you a few of the positive. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we read and we think and we have opinions. And we're finding out that reading changes your brain structure in a good way and makes you more empathetic, and you learn to understand people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, and it just makes you more willing to take chances, I think, in helping people, in getting involved with people. And yet it sort of takes you away from people too, and I'll get into that. So I'm not going to talk about the positives of reading in this video, because I'm a booktuber. Of course, I know that that there are more positives than negatives in reading. This is my personal journey of reading, of my reading life. But it's more than that. So when I say, do I read excessively? I don't think I do anymore, but I think if I did at one time, it wasn't because of the books itself and my love of books, which of course I have, and I had and I still have. It was because of mental illness. Now, my mother suffered from what they call now bipolar depression, and she was hospitalized many times during my childhood and in my adulthood, and she in fact passed away in a mental institution. But she was also, when I had to look for her, she was the lady reading with the book. So she used escape instead of confronting her problems, and that's one of the cons that I'm going to talk about when it comes to, there's pros and cons in everything, I think, or mostly everything. And today I'm going to talk more about how reading can excessively, whatever that is to you, can maybe impact the totality of your life if you're a certain type of person. Like I said, this is my personal journey. So like I said, sometimes reading can be lonely, and we look into books for friendship. I mean, I know that I was into fairy tales when I was a child, and I had imaginary companions. One of them was Peter Pan. He was my brother. One of them was Rose Red, in Snow White and Rose Red. And I would talk to, because I was an only child, I would be talking to these people in my house, and that sparked my imagination. But it also maybe kept me from interacting with my playmates as much as I wanted to, because sometimes that wasn't always a positive experience in my life when I was a child. Now, so that's one of the things that was a con for me. And when we use it as an escape, reading can sometimes leave little time for other activities, especially now. Of course, people say now, put away the phone and pick up a book. But in the 50s, we didn't have phones. But like I said, we had a different type of life, that we were commanded by our parents to go play outside. And now there's computers, and people will be playing a computer game. Children will want to play computer games or other ways of escapism, which sometimes are also not positive activities. Okay, so that's one negative. Now, of course, it's if anybody knows, it's Mental Health May, and Kim and I are not doing anything big for Mental Health May, but I believe that by doing this video, it also has to do with the psychological aspects of the pros and cons of reading. It has to do with mental health, because these problems that I'm talking about might only affect people who are more prone to depression, or isolate themselves, or have agoraphobia, afraid to go out, or social anxiety. So they escape into books. Another thing that I noticed is that I still do to this day get obsessed with characters in books and authors who write these books. And while this can be a great thing, right now I just read, and I'm rereading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I'm obsessed with a lot of the characters in this book, but mostly Betty Smith. And I'm trying to locate a biography of her that is not very popular, and it's out of print, but I'm determined to get it. So because this book has affected me, every time I read it, I find out more stuff that just blows me away, because it was taking place in the same area where I was brought up, and it really resonates with me. Sometimes I think that my obsession with characters in books from the time I was young until now hasn't always been a positive thing. For example, sometimes I used to believe that I had experienced something that I read in a book. I thought that I had actually gone someplace. For example, traveling. Before I went to college in my late 30s, I mostly read nonfiction, traveling books, self-help books. Of course, I read some classics that we had in school, and me and my cousin, my first buddy reading experience, we read Gone with the Wind together, and we wrote letters back and forth because we both didn't have telephones. So that was a wonderful experience, and it's sort of like a buddy read booktube experience. But sometimes I felt that so the books that I read weren't really highbrow books. I didn't know about important books really, except for like Gone with the Wind, which we read in a more romantic saga kind of story rather than reading it closely, let's say. And so my nonfiction travel book, sometimes I would read something either in a fairy tale book or a travel book, and I really believed I had been there or done what the character did. So that was a problem, I think. And of course, like another con is the physical, a lifelong physical strains of reading, eye strain. Right now I can't read physical books, too many of them. I read mostly on my e-reader because of eye strain, and of course a lot of the sitting that I've done all my life hasn't helped my health much. I have arthritis and pain in my neck and shoulders because of all the sitting that I've done, and it also kept me from maybe being more active and being healthier, going for a walk instead of picking up a book. Maybe in a lot of the different times of my life might have been a better choice. So I'm going to just read a few other things about maybe what affected me negatively if I look over the decades of my life that weren't so wonderful. And of course, I'm so glad that I was given the gift of reading and that I read. Reading is way more pros than cons but I wanted to talk about the cons. And one is neglecting other hobbies and interests. Excessive reading can leave little time for other activities and passions. And I have to say that when I started Booktube especially, I stopped writing and doing the other things that really were my other passions, which was when I was young, I would always have a notebook and write poetry, spoken word, and then I wrote a memoir. And for 4 years that I've been doing Booktube, I haven't really written. And I was just watching a podcast where this person was talking about how they read from 0 to 20, in other words, for pleasure, and then from 20 on, for other reasons beside pleasure, to enhance their writing career. And now they're back into reading for education and pleasure. And that was an interesting statement to me. Another con might be the lack of focus on living in the present. And right now people do meditation and they try to live every day in the present and go out and smell the flowers. And I know that a lot of booktubers that I know personally take time to exercise, to travel, to do all those other things. But sometimes it's easier to just take a book and stay home, and not when somebody calls you to go somewhere, you're in an interesting part of a book. So are you really living in the moment? And I live in Hawaii, where I can be going to the beach every day, but I don't. But then a lot of local people don't go to the beach every day. People are surprised at that, but you know, we have lives too. People have jobs and everything. And now that I'm retired, I could go to the beach every day. I can go other places, but that feeling of wanting to stay home with a book is very strong in me. And, you know, I talked about taking a book to the beach and what that can do to a real book, or even a Kindle maybe. So, you know, that's not like an option. Just take the book to the beach. It's we have a lot of sand and wind and seawater, salt water, so it's not good for physical books at least. You know, and also like your general sleep habits. Have you stayed up all night reading a book till 3 a.m.? I have, but as I get older, I've noticed that the next day and the next few days, I'm not the same after that. So I've decided to stop doing that and not read all night, or read something in one go if possible, because I feel that it does take me out of living in the present. And, you know, I don't have that much present left. I want to do things, and in fact I'm trying to travel next month, not next month but June, and I'm happy that I'm going to do that, and I'm not bringing any books with me. I might buy some books, but I'm not bringing any books with me because I want to make this a living in the moment experience. So that might be a con. It might not be for you. Another difficulty that was a problem for me was lack of real life communication. Excessive reading, it says, and I did some research, can make it harder to interact with people in real life, potentially leading to difficulties with communication and social skills. Now, when I was younger, I remember finding a guy, a classmate, a former classmate on a social media, I don't know if it was Facebook, who didn't remember me, even though we were sitting we were in the back row, and he was in one row and I was right next to him. He was a gregarious, outgoing person, and I'm trying to tell him who I was, and he says, "Were you the shy girl with the ponytail, with the blonde ponytail?" I mean, he could not remember me because I was that shy. I was a very shy person, and I didn't feel comfortable or self-confident about my social interactions, because mainly my interactions were with characters in books. So I think that for some people, for some children, can be considered limiting, if you want to put it that way, limiting your life. But I didn't stay that way. I changed. I'm a booktuber, so I had to change. But I still have a lack of self-confidence, and that has stayed with me. But that is not only due to reading too much. You know, reading also can isolate you. You know, we're isolated. It's still, except on Booktube, a solitary experience, and we don't. Of course, now I'm on Booktube, so I get to interact with all my friends on Booktube and tell them what I'm reading and talk to you about what I'm reading, and that's great. So I'm glad that we have come so far in technology that there is such a thing as Booktube. But maybe I joined it at age 70 instead of age 25, so I still am suffering maybe from the long-term effects of excessive reading that limited my life. Now that sounds pretty dramatic, because reading has enhanced my life much more than it has limited it. But I just wanted to read something to you that's important, and that kind of changed my life when I went to college in my 30s. Now, when I went to college in my 30s in Minnesota, that expanded my life, and I started reading important books. What I call important books, I mean books from different outlooks, different cultures, from people who lived 100 years before me. And I was actually doing an internship where I did legal advocate work for victims of crime. In fact, I ended up minoring in criminal justice, and I'm still interested in the legal process. And I have it in my mind that I should have been a lawyer sometimes, but that's another story. But it made me, by interacting, by reading all these books about criminal justice and justice in general, made me think of the Ray Bradbury quote: "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them." And that's very applicable in today's society, that we're steering people away from reading certain books or just books in general. And that is not acceptable. And I'm so glad that I was able to read all the books that, and I'm thinking of Judy Blume and the books that are banned right now that I was allowed to read, and I'm very happy about that. But now I'm thinking about my whole life. So this is my journey. It's not everyone's journey, and especially when I talk about isolation, and I know many booktubers who have vibrant social lives. They don't let reading put them into an isolated state. But it's Mental Health May coming up in days, and Kim and we were hosting for the last 3 years that event, and we're taking it on a lowdown this year. But I believe that this video has a lot to do with mental health and mental illness, because a lot of these cons, so-called cons of can reading limit your life, have to do with mental illness, and getting help for it. Now, I talked about my mother who had bipolar disorder. Now, she turned to books instead of going out and getting help for her mental problems, albeit that there's no cure for mental illness even now, but there are more tools in the toolbox to use. And at that time, there were horrible things like shock therapy that were done in a very primitive way. They still do electrotherapy, shock therapy, but not in a way that they did it in the 50s. And my mother believed that was her only, she only felt out of her mental illness when she got those shock treatments. She wouldn't speak to a psychiatrist. She would just say, "Give me my books and leave me alone." She didn't believe in psychiatry. She didn't believe in therapy. She didn't believe in, and they didn't have good medication at that time. So she read. She always told me, "I read thousands and thousands of books." But during those thousands of books, she didn't find a way out of her dilemma. In fact, she passed away in a mental hospital. Now, a lot of my children and my children's children suffer from some form, thankfully not severe mental illness as my mother did. Only one of my children's, one of my sons has a severe mental illness. But we all struggle, and we are all readers. They are not readers in the same sense of excessive reading, if there is such a thing. But I made sure that they read and that they would find comfort in books, because that's more important than finding flaws at the end of your life, at the ending part of your life, and saying, "Well, I should have done this and I should have done that," instead of read. I'm going to Europe in June, hopefully, even with my sore knee, and I'm not bringing a Kindle with me. I'm not bringing a book with me, because that's my plan, to live in the moment. I plan to do bookstore shopping though, but I'm not going to do any passive reading. I'm going to do active browsing instead, because I think that that's a way that I can still be a reader, but still smell the roses or whatever is any flower that's blooming in June. To summarize, I can say, for me, reading excessively at times kept me isolated and kept me from seeking help for my mental illness. But it also taught me things that I didn't know. For example, when I was having my first child, I read Childbirth Without Fear. I always said I read it fearfully. But it taught me how I was going to handle the anxiety of childbirth without having anyone to talk to. So books have been my friends, and they still are my friends. But have they limited some experiences? Not the books itself. It was me. It was me. And I know there's a lot of people who are not outgoing they call themselves introverts. And I want to know what you think about what I've been talking about. If you are 40 or older especially, do you feel that you've read excessively, and did that improve your life or limit your life? I really want to know. I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm Marilyn, and please subscribe to my channel. Please give it a like if you found this interesting in any way. I am so happy that I joined Booktube, and I met all these book lovers, and I want to know what you think about, can we read too much? Can it affect our life in certain ways that aren't all positive? Because I know that I can do another video and tell you all the wonderful things that happened to me because of reading, and all of the people that I've met in books that taught me things, like Ray Bradbury. So before I do want to say one thing. Of all people, I found a quote by Albert Einstein that said, "Reading after a certain age diverts the mind too much from its creative pursuit." And that made me think that I want to do other things beside. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, if it's at a certain age, or because I used to write poetry, and because I read so much, I don't do that anymore, and I want to get into doing that. But I think that as I get into the last half of my life, last quarter of my life, I want to really be more creative. And I've heard that from Jack, like I said, that she wants to do other things beside read. When you join Booktube, reading becomes your main extracurricular activity. It's almost like a job sometimes if you want to make it that way. But I plan to do more creative things, and yeah, no matter what the age, I think you should just read, but also have creative pursuits. And until my next video, please comment below. Aloha.